My wife cheated on me on our anniversary. I prepared a surprise for her and gathered the whole family. In return, I got an unexpected and unpleasant surprise from her, one the entire family witnessed. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting at home, planning some grand romantic surprise after 20 years of marriage. But here I was, organizing everything down to the smallest detail. Maybe part of me felt like I had to make up for lost time. Or maybe I was just trying to bring back a little spark. My wife, Kelly, had been in Atlanta for a conference. She went there twice a year like clockwork, and I knew this trip was coming for months. Funny enough, it lined up right with our 20th wedding anniversary. I wanted to do something special, something that'd catch her completely off guard. Now, Kelly, she's the type that likes to keep busy, always on the move. I'd suggested coming along for the trip once or twice, but she brushed it off, saying she'd be tied up with meetings and too tired for sightseeing. So, I let it go. This time, though, I had a different plan. It started when I was approached to build a vacation home for a client down in Atlanta. His name was Mark. We hit it off pretty well, and once we got the business part out of the way, I pitched him this idea I'd been cooking up. "Mark," I said, leaning in a little, "our anniversary's coming up on the 10th. Kelly's gonna be downtown for that conference. I was thinking, maybe I could set up a nice dinner for her and her coworker. You know, something special. I even bought this pearl necklace I want to surprise her with at the table." Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "Why not just go with her? Deliver it yourself? Seems easier." I smiled. "I'd love to, but you know how she is. Kelly's all business. By the time she gets done with dinner, she's ready to crash at the hotel. Besides, I've got obligations here. Traveling just to sit at a hotel bar alone sounds kind of pointless." He nodded, seeing my point. "Well, you're lucky," he said. "My daughter's in college over there. She knows all the good spots. I'll have her set it up. She can even hand over the necklace." That got me thinking. Actually, how about this? What if your daughter sits at the table next to Kelly and streams the whole thing live for me? I'd love to see her face when she opens the box. Mark grinned. "I'll pass it along. She'd probably enjoy being part of it." Things started falling into place from there. I planned a little party back home, ordered a bunch of pizzas, and invited our families over. Kelly's parents, my folks, her sister. Everyone was coming by to watch. Even our daughter Emily, who's 16, had her friends over. The setup was simple. Mark's daughter would be there at the restaurant, close enough to catch everything, but not close enough for Kelly to notice. When Kelly and her friend Lisa sat down and ordered, the waiter would deliver the necklace. We'd watch it all happen live, right there on the big screen in our living room. "Jonathan," I told myself, "you've outdone yourself this time." I could already picture Kelly's surprised look when she opened that box. I kept it light for everyone at the house. No sound coming from our side. I told them, grinning. "So don't hold back on comments. You can even tell me what a genius I am." Everyone laughed, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I was doing something right. This was going to be the best anniversary yet, even if we were miles apart. I didn't know what to say. Emily's voice broke the tense silence first. "Who's that guy with Mom?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the screen as Kelly came into view, hand in hand with some young guy who didn't look like Sue. "I thought she was supposed to be with Lisa," Emily added, narrowing her eyes. I squinted at the screen, feeling my stomach twist. I don't know who he is," I admitted. "Seems like they're pretty close." Kelly's dad let out a low grunt, crossing his arms as he frowned at the TV. No one else said anything, but I could feel the weight of their stares. On the screen, Kelly and the man took their seats, and we could hear the conversation clearly. "It's nice of your husband to pay for our dinner tonight," the guy said, flashing a smug grin. "I'll make sure this anniversary is unforgettable, at least for you. It might be even better than your honeymoon." Kelly laughed, leaning back in her chair. "Then you better order a steak," she teased. "You'll need the energy. My honeymoon was epic." "Really?" the guy asked, raising his eyebrows. "Did you have a lover then? Or did your husband actually manage to ring the bells?" Kelly's laugh was light, almost casual. "Jonathan did just fine. Thanks for asking. You're the only other lover I've had in the last 20 years, not counting Jonathan, of course." I clenched my jaw. "Lucky for me, he's starting to slow down," she added, giving the guy a playful nudge. But don't worry, tonight's anniversary will be better than most women could dream of. I'll make sure of it. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Dad, maybe we've seen enough. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. Kelly's sister spoke up nervously. This isn't really fair, Jonathan. Kelly doesn't know we're watching this. Maybe it's time to turn it off. I shook my head, eyes fixed on the screen. We can't miss her reaction when she gets the necklace, I said, my face hot. Mark's daughter was sitting quietly, her face bright red. She avoided eye contact with anyone in the room. Let's just see how this plays out, I muttered. On the screen, Kelly smiled as the waiter came over to take their order. It's on me, the man, Nick, as she called him, said with a grin. But before he could leave, another waiter approached, carrying a small, wrapped box. Oh look, Jonathan must have sent me an anniversary gift, Kelly said, her eyes lighting up as she tore open the packaging. Isn't she beautiful? She added, holding up the pearl necklace. Nick leaned in, fastening it around her neck. Just lean in closer, he whispered. His hands lingered longer than they should have, sliding over her shoulders and across her chest. You're lucky, an older woman at the next table commented, smiling warmly. Your husband is so romantic. Nick laughed. She's lucky, all right, he replied. Not just for the husband. She's got a handsome boyfriend, too. Kelly shot him a look, but the woman just chuckled, shaking her head. Nick leaned down, brushing his lips against Kelly's. I gave you a pearl necklace last night, he whispered. I think it looked better on you than this one. Kelly laughed softly, curling her fingers around the pearls. That's the difference between a husband and a lover, she said, her voice low and playful. Husbands give us jewelry, and lovers give us. I can't keep doing this, Mark's daughter whispered suddenly, cutting the feed. She turned off her phone and stood up, her face pale. I should have stopped earlier, she said, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry, Mr. Jonathan. I'll delete everything. I never meant for it to turn out like this. She grabbed her things and left in a hurry, leaving everyone sitting in stunned silence. One of Emily's friends cleared her throat. It's late. We should probably head out. Yeah. See you tomorrow, Emily said quietly, her eyes glossy with tears. If I even go. She turned to me, hesitating. Dad, is it okay if I stay with my friends tonight? I just feel like I need to get out of here. I swallowed hard, barely able to get the words out. Yeah, of course, honey. Go ahead. We'll talk tomorrow. Drive safe, I added, my voice barely more than a whisper. As she left with her friends, Kelly's mom shifted in her chair, finally speaking up. I don't know what to say, she murmured. Jonathan, I think this might look worse than it is. Kelly loves you. She's ready to give anything for Emily. Just take a breath. Don't do anything rash. I nodded stiffly, but the words didn't sink in. One by one, the rest of the family repeated the same thing. Calm down, don't overreact, talk to Kelly. I sat there, staring at the black screen. Eventually, I stood up and looked at everyone. I need to think, I said quietly. Please let yourselves out. Once the house was empty, I pulled out a suitcase and started packing. Meanwhile, Kelly's phone lit up with missed calls and messages, more than she'd ever had at once. Her sister and mom were demanding answers. Who was Nick? And why was she so friendly with him? The morning after everything fell apart, Kelly must have woken up to more missed calls and messages than she'd ever seen before. Her mom and sister had each sent her at least a dozen texts, their words heated and demanding. They insisted she had broken my heart, and that Emily was just as upset. Kelly scrolled through her phone, searching for anything from me. But there was nothing. No messages. No calls. Just silence. How did they find out about Nick? How much did they actually know? And where were Emily and I now? Her mind must have been racing as she tried to piece things together. She needed to know exactly what I knew, and what I only suspected. She called her mother first. Mom, it's me. I forgot to turn my phone back on last night, she said, keeping her voice as calm as possible. I saw you try to call. Is everything okay with Jonathan? Her mom's reply was sharp and immediate. Only if you think losing your husband, humiliating your daughter, and disgracing your family counts as okay. You seem to enjoy that damn pearl necklace from your boyfriend well enough. Her mom snapped. Kelly's breath must have caught in her throat. Jonathan gave me that string of pearls for our anniversary, she said quickly. Why are you so upset? Her mom's voice lowered, almost growling. Your father and I have been around long enough to know exactly what your boyfriend meant when he said you were wearing his pearl necklace. Mom, you can't honestly believe? Oh, I can. And I do, she interrupted. Don't insult me, Kelly. I'm not blind. What makes you think I would do something like that? Kelly's voice cracked slightly, panic creeping in. Why do you think I have a boyfriend? Because I saw it with my own eyes, her mother growled. Jonathan invited us all to watch you open his anniversary gift. He reserved that table for you and Lisa, not some young man named Nick. We heard every word you said to him. Kelly must have felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. We saw everything, Kelly, her mother went on, her voice softening just slightly. Jonathan treats you like gold, and you laughed at him behind his back. Husbands give us jewelry, lovers give us climaxes. Wasn't that how you put it? Kelly's face must have gone pale. You actually heard me say that? Her mom's voice was heavy with disappointment. Jonathan had Mark's daughter set up a live stream, Kelly. He wanted to see your face when you opened the necklace. We were all going to call and congratulate you afterward. She paused, her voice breaking. Instead, we watched you kiss someone else. The silence between them must have felt unbearable. This might be your last anniversary, Kelly, her mother said quietly. At least with Jonathan. Maybe once things calm down, you'll run into your boyfriend again. Mom, you know I love Jonathan. Nick doesn't mean anything to me. It was just something to pass the time. These conferences get boring, Kelly insisted, almost pleading. Her mom's laugh was bitter. Oh, well, that changes everything, doesn't it? She said sarcastically. Jonathan will feel much better knowing his wife wasn't in love, just bored. I'm sure that clears things up. Mom, don't call me names. I'm trying to fix this. How do I convince Jonathan that he's the only man I love? You didn't convince me, her mom replied bluntly. You've got a lot of work to do, Kelly. Watching you with that man was one of the hardest things I've ever had to see. I doubt Jonathan feels any different. After she hung up, Kelly sat in silence. Her family had witnessed everything, every word, every touch, every laugh she shared with Nick. She called Emily next. Emily? Where are you? She asked, her voice softer now. I'm at Morgan's, Emily answered coldly. She's trying to make me feel better since, our family is falling apart. We're not falling apart, Kelly said quickly. Please, come home. We can talk about this. Where's your father? Emily's voice was flat. He's staying at the lake house. I don't think he wants to see you right now. He was so excited to surprise you last night. You broke his heart, Mom. Kelly's breath caught. Please, come home, she repeated weakly. After the call ended, Kelly walked through the house. Jonathan's office was half empty. His laptop, files, and even a few small personal items were gone. When she checked the closet, she found that all his clothes were missing too. But what struck her the hardest was that he hadn't taken a single photo of her. Not one. Later that evening, Kelly made dinner for Emily, hoping it would soften things. When Emily finally came home, she barely said a word. Her answers were short and distant, and Kelly knew she had every right to be angry. The next morning, Kelly drove out to the lake house at sunrise. I was slumped on the couch, passed out, surrounded by empty beer cans. Jonathan, she whispered, gently shaking my arm. We need to talk. I groaned, slowly sitting up, rubbing my face. Without a word, I disappeared into the bathroom. Kelly made coffee while she waited, hoping I'd be the one to start the conversation. When I returned, she handed me a mug and sat down across from me. I'm sorry, she said softly. The pearls were a beautiful gift. I love them, Jonathan. I just wish you had told me you were planning to show everyone. I looked up, my eyes cold. You, I muttered. Kelly's heart must have cracked at the way I said it. In all our years together, I had never spoken to her like that. That's not going to help, she replied carefully. Tell me what I can do. You're the only man I've ever loved. That hasn't changed. I shook my head, staring into my coffee. What problem exactly are you trying to solve, Kelly? That I surprised you with a gift at dinner? That I let our families watch you open it? Or that you showed up with another man? She bit her lip. Jonathan, you know what the problem is, she said softly. I nodded. Yeah, I saw you and Nick last night. The next morning, the weight of everything lingered heavily in the air. Kelly sat across from me at the kitchen table, visibly uneasy. Her hands twisted together as if she were searching for something to hold on to, but nothing could ground her in that moment. I leaned back in my chair, carefully observing her. I'd known for a while that she occasionally had dinners with colleagues, but this wasn't the same. The way she sat, fidgeting and flustered, told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. Kelly admitted she had lied. The dinner I thought she was sharing with Lisa had been with Nick, and worse than that, the two of them had slept together. The weight of her words hit hard, though they weren't entirely unexpected. She acknowledged that the problem wasn't just the affair itself but the fact that I, and the rest of our family, had been witnesses to it. The intimate conversation she had with Nick at the restaurant had played out in real time for all of us to hear, stripping away any possibility of denial. There was no defense she could give, and it was clear she knew that too. I pressed her for answers. How long had this been happening? How many times? And how deep did the betrayal run? I needed to know the truth, even if I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. Kelly, face flushed with shame, admitted that Nick had been the only man she had been with outside of our marriage. Still, the fact that she was defending the number didn't sit right with me. Whether it had been one man or several, the betrayal felt the same. She confessed that Nick had been part of her life during 3 separate conferences, each time lasting for 2 nights. 6 nights in total, enough to shatter 2 decades of trust. There were no other occasions, she assured me, but by then, it didn't seem to matter. The thought that Nick might have been satisfied with just one encounter each night seemed almost laughable to me. I could feel the bitterness rising as I questioned it further. Kelly hesitated, then admitted it had happened multiple times each night. I found myself detached, almost numb, as if hearing the details made the situation easier to process, even though it didn't. The hardest part was understanding why. Kelly didn't blame our marriage or me, nor did she accuse our relationship of being unfulfilling. She chalked it up to boredom and vanity, Nick's relentless pursuit of her, coupled with her own weakness. It wasn't about love, she claimed. Nick meant nothing to her. But the admission that she could give herself so easily to someone who meant nothing was harder to accept than if she had fallen in love with him. Her words made me question everything about our marriage. If I could ever trust her again, or if more Nicks would come along in the future, each one taking a little more from what we'd built together. The fact that she found Nick attractive and successful only drove the knife deeper. It was clear she hadn't just fallen into the situation by accident. He had pursued her, but she had welcomed it. The combination of his attention and charm had been enough to draw her in. As the conversation dragged on, it became clear that she wasn't trying to justify herself. Her voice cracked with remorse, but even that felt hollow in the face of what had happened. She assured me that it wouldn't happen again, but I couldn't help but reflect on all the promises she had made before. At our wedding, during difficult times, and throughout the years. Her beauty had always attracted attention, and Nick wouldn't be the last to try. I wondered how I could possibly trust that the next time someone came along, she wouldn't find herself in the same situation. Kelly reached across the table, searching for some form of reassurance, but I pulled away. I asked her how Nick made her feel, and she admitted that the experience left her feeling dirty and used. That feeling, she confessed, was part of what kept drawing her back. I sat there quietly, letting her words settle. It was one thing to hear that she regretted it, but knowing she had sought out something that made her feel so low was harder to understand than the affair itself. The day after everything unraveled, I sat at the lake house, still trying to make sense of it all. The words from our last conversation echoed in my head. Kelly's attempt to explain, justify, and beg for forgiveness. I hadn't been as furious as I thought I would be. Maybe because deep down, I had already accepted it. I had believed for a while that something was missing between us, but I never wanted to face the idea that it might lead her to someone else. I guess I thought if she wasn't interested in me anymore, she'd just say it. Instead, She handed parts of herself to Nick while holding on to the rest of our marriage like nothing was wrong. I couldn't stop thinking about how she had let him speak about me, how she had laughed along and said nothing while he boasted about giving her a better anniversary than I ever could. I remembered every word from that dinner, the little comments that cut deeper each time I replayed them in my head. She hadn't corrected him. She didn't stop him from suggesting that I wasn't enough. She had let it hang in the air like it was the truth. What was the point of pretending anymore? Kelly had found something new. Maybe it wasn't love, but it didn't need to be. She had chosen it over me, whether she wanted to admit it or not. I told her I was done. There was nothing left to salvage. She tried to stop me, pleading that we could work through it if we just talked. But I knew that was a dead end. I told her to let the lawyers handle it. I wasn't interested in hearing more apologies or justifications. That day, Kelly went to work, and I took the day off to move my things. I wanted everything out of the house before she came back. I couldn't stand the idea of staying there another night, not with the memories of what I had seen playing over and over in my head. By the time she came home, my closet was empty, my personal things gone. She found no photographs, no lingering signs of me in the house we had shared for 2 decades. I didn't want her explanations. I didn't want to hear her reasons. At work the next day, Kelly faced her own consequences. Lisa, her closest coworker, was waiting for her in the break room, and she wasn't happy. Lisa confronted her, angry that I had asked about Atlanta and their supposed shared hotel room. Lisa made it clear she wanted no part in Kelly's lies. She reminded Kelly that she had stopped attending conferences long ago, refusing to be used as cover for her affair with Nick. Kelly admitted that I had found out everything and that divorce was inevitable. Lisa's reaction was blunt and unforgiving. No man, she said, would tolerate that kind of betrayal. Kelly could only agree, acknowledging how blind and selfish she had been. Lisa softened slightly, reminding Kelly that she had warned her repeatedly about the risks she was taking. But by then, it didn't matter. I had already left. I spent that day at the lake house, unpacking and settling into what felt like an entirely different life. As much as I hated the thought of living without Kelly, I hated even more what she had done to us. I couldn't forgive her disregard for our marriage, the way she brushed aside loyalty and respect like they were optional. The next morning, I sat in the office preparing to leave for a meeting with the divorce lawyer when I noticed an email from Kelly. For a long time, I just stared at it, debating whether to open it or delete it without a second thought. In the end, curiosity won. The message wasn't long, but it hit hard. Kelly admitted she had been foolish, so sure that I would never find out, so confident that her actions wouldn't hurt me if I didn't know about them. She wrote about how she finally understood the truth, that even lies kept in the dark still destroy marriages. She told me I deserved more. She begged for forgiveness, but said she wouldn't fight the divorce or challenge any decisions I made about our future. Kelly admitted she had lost the right to influence the course of our marriage. She ended the message by saying she still loved me and wished me the best, calling me a wonderful husband and father. As I read her words, I felt the weight of them settle in my chest. It was just like Kelly to take full responsibility, to shoulder the blame without making excuses. For the first time since the night I saw her with Nick, I felt something other than anger, just sadness. The weeks after everything came to light felt like moving through a fog I couldn't shake. I kept myself busy with work, but nothing filled the emptiness that settled over me. Kelly had sent the email, but I couldn't bring myself to answer it. I had nothing left to say. By the time she showed up at the lake house one morning, the only real connection she had to me was through Emily. On Friday afternoon, Emily called Kelly to let her know she'd be staying at my place for the weekend. I told Emily I'd bring her home on Sunday evening. Kelly didn't argue. She knew this was how things would continue now. That weekend must have been long for her. I imagine she spent most of it thinking about how she had gotten herself here, wondering if there was anything left to salvage. I thought about her, too, but not with the same longing. I just kept circling back to the same conclusion. There wasn't a way to put the pieces back together. When I dropped Emily off Sunday evening, she seemed distant. As we pulled into the driveway, she shifted in her seat, hesitant to get out of the truck. "Dad's divorcing you," she said bluntly, not meeting Kelly's eyes as she opened the car door. "He can't live with someone who doesn't respect him." I've never seen him cry as much as I have this week. I had tried to keep things together in front of Emily, but it was clear the cracks had shown anyway. Kelly, caught off guard, tried to defend herself. She insisted that Nick wasn't her boyfriend, that he was nothing compared to me. But Emily wasn't having it. Could have fooled me, Emily shot back. This wasn't the first time, was it? You've been lying to us for years. Kelly finally stopped the charade and admitted the truth. She had slept with Nick at 2 other conferences. That made 3 trips in total. Emily's face twisted with anger. You're calling that just a mistake? You cheated on Dad for years, and you think an apology fixes it? Kelly tried to explain, tried to tell Emily she didn't think any less of me, but it didn't matter. Emily wasn't ready to listen. She shut herself in her room, leaving Kelly alone to think about what she'd just lost. The routine slowly settled into something that felt like normal, but it wasn't the same. Kelly and Emily barely spoke at home, and when they did, it was short and cold. Kelly clung to her work to get through the days. The office hadn't changed, except for Lisa's frosty demeanor. Lisa kept her distance, making it clear she hadn't forgiven Kelly for dragging her into the lie. At school events, Kelly went alone. She sat quietly in the back unless her mom joined her. The few times I showed up, I stayed far away, sitting across the room without making eye contact. The distance between us was obvious to everyone. Whispers followed wherever Kelly went. Some fathers, both married and single, weren't shy about making comments or jokes in her direction. The whole town knew what had happened. I threw myself into work. If there was one good thing to come out of this, it was that the business thrived. But even as things grew, I knew what Kelly was entitled to. My lawyer suggested ways to reduce her share, but I shut it down immediately. She earned her half, I told him. She worked beside me for years. When things were tight, she gave up part of her salary to keep the company running. I'm not taking that away from her. Kelly didn't expect that. When her lawyer told her she'd be receiving half of the business, she was stunned. She argued that it was too much, that I had done most of the work while she just helped where she could. She told her lawyer to offer me a 10th instead. I didn't budge. I had made up my mind. If it weren't for her sacrifices early on, there wouldn't be anything to split now. By spring, the snow melted, and with it, the final pieces of our marriage. Kelly officially became a single woman and a third owner of Simon's Enterprises. I cut off all communication except through our lawyers. I didn't even take her calls. Emily made it clear where she wanted to be. She told Kelly she'd spend the summer at the lake house with me. I knew it was another way for her to distance herself from Kelly, but I wasn't going to argue. To prepare, I threw myself into renovations. The lake house was small, and I wanted Emily to have space. By the end of July, I had nearly doubled the size of the place. 3 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, and all overlooking the lake. It became a modern, comfortable retreat, a project that kept my hands busy and my mind clear. As August rolled around, I found myself staring out at the lake, wondering how I had ended up here. The life I'd built with Kelly was over, but at least I still had Emily. For now, that was enough. The summer at the lake house had been a quiet escape, but by August, I decided to break the routine with a small open house. I invited friends, neighbors, and of course, Emily's friends. I figured it would be a nice way to bring people together, and honestly, I was ready for a little distraction. One of Emily's friends brought along her older cousin, a striking blonde with an easy smile and bright eyes that seemed to follow me throughout the day. She wore a modest 2-piece swimsuit that somehow managed to turn more heads than the flashier outfits around. I couldn't help but notice her. Throughout the afternoon, she hovered nearby, laughing at my jokes and finding reasons to linger in my conversations. Her flirtations were subtle, but unmistakable. Later, as Emily and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen, she couldn't resist teasing me. "Dad," she said with a grin, "are you trying to catch yourself a bikini-clad patty?" I nearly choked on my drink. Of course not. She can't be older than 25. And I'm not exactly diving back into the dating pool. She's 27, Emily replied, clearly enjoying herself. And she's definitely interested. She's been asking questions. How long you've been single, how old you are, what you do for work. You know, the usual checklist for potential husbands. I laughed, shaking my head. I just met her today. Let's not jump to marriage proposals. Emily's eyes twinkled. I'm not saying that. I'm just pointing out that she seems interested. I wouldn't mind if you dated her. She's nice, and maybe it's time you had someone to help you forget about Mom. Her words hung in the air for a moment, heavier than I expected. Patty seems focused on her career, Emily continued, sensing the shift in my mood. I don't think she's looking to settle down right away. But that doesn't mean she doesn't enjoy a little male attention. I smirked, nudging her playfully. Thanks for the insight. But I doubt someone like her would go for an old guy like me. Still, I appreciate the vote of confidence. Kelly had thrown herself back into her work, trying to keep her head above water. Her office occupied the top 2 floors of a building in the business district, and just down the block was a cozy Italian bistro she and her co-workers frequented. Every Thursday, it had become their spot, a standing lunch where they could unwind and gossip. One afternoon, the bistro was unusually packed, and Kelly's group found themselves without a table. One of the employees from Benson Advertising, which occupied the 2nd floor of the building, noticed them and waved them over to join their larger table. Kelly and her friends gratefully accepted the invitation, quickly blending into the lively mix of conversations. As introductions were made, she found herself seated near a younger woman from the advertising team, bright, attractive, and radiating good humor. Kelly couldn't help but enjoy the woman's light-hearted nature. As the group teased the young woman, she laughed along with them. We don't all have a rich boyfriend with a house on Lake Henry, one of Kelly's friends teased. It must be nice to wake up with the lake reflecting through the windows, another added. The young woman grinned. Especially when there's a handsome guy to wake up next to. Makes getting out of bed a lot harder. Kelly smiled politely, sipping her water. But the next comment stopped her cold. If that's the guy who picks you up after work on Thursdays, I can see why you'd want to stay in bed, one of the women said with a chuckle. He looks a little older than you, but he's not bad looking, and he seems pretty fit. The young woman's face brightened. Oh, Jonathan, she replied casually. He's all that and more. A great guy, and an even better lover. Kelly's heart sank. Her friend leaned in, lowering her voice just enough to let curiosity slip through. Jonathan, she asked carefully, glancing at Kelly from the corner of her eye. Kelly kept her expression neutral, but inside, she felt the air drain from the room. At first, Kelly thought it was a coincidence. But as Patty continued, describing Jonathan in detail, it became clear who she was talking about. You're not talking about Jonathan Simpson, are you? Kelly asked, trying to keep her tone even. Patty's eyes lit up. You know him? She asked, smiling. He's great, isn't he? Looks amazing for his age, and he's such a solid guy. One of Kelly's co-workers shifted uncomfortably. Patty, Jonathan used to be Kelly's husband, she interjected. There was an awkward pause, but Kelly leaned forward, extending her hand. I'm Kelly Simpson, she said with a polite smile. I didn't catch your name. Patty Lawson, she replied, shaking Kelly's hand. I had no idea you were Jonathan's ex-wife. You're beautiful. I guess I just assumed he was blinded by love. But it turns out he had good taste after all. Patty hesitated for a moment. I hope you're not upset that I'm living with Jonathan now. Kelly felt a small sting at those words, but she managed to keep her composure. I can't blame either of you for that, she replied honestly. You're a beautiful young woman. I can see why Jonathan would like you. I'm just surprised Emily never mentioned you. Patty smiled warmly. I can't speak for her, but I want to say you've raised a wonderful daughter. Emily is smart, kind, and beautiful, just like her mom. I really enjoy when she comes to visit. That evening, as Kelly and Emily sat down for dinner, the conversation shifted toward me. Why didn't you tell me your dad had a girlfriend living with him? Kelly asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Emily glanced up, her fork pausing mid-air. I didn't want to upset you, she admitted. I know how you feel about Dad. I figured it wasn't something you needed to hear. Kelly took a breath, setting her glass down. I'm glad Jonathan's happy. He's a wonderful person, and he deserves someone who appreciates him, even if it's not me. Emily poked at her food thoughtfully. I don't think Patty loves him, at least not yet. She made it clear her career comes first. But she does like him, and he's happy. That's all that matters. Kelly nodded. That's good to hear. I'm just glad he found someone. Emily hesitated, as if debating whether to bring something else up. Are you thinking about dating again? She asked. You still talk to Nick? Kelly shook her head immediately. Nick's not someone I'd ever consider for a relationship. He's superficial, selfish, and more trouble than he's worth. It wasn't love, it was just a mistake. Emily raised an eyebrow. But you kept going back. I did, Kelly admitted, her voice softening. But it wasn't because I loved him. I was careless. I thought I could get away with it. It was my weakness, not his fault. Emily leaned back in her chair. Are you interested in anyone else? She asked. You're still beautiful. I've seen how some of the dads at school events look at you. Kelly smiled faintly. Your father ruined me for other men, she admitted quietly. Our divorce is public knowledge. Most people in town know why it happened. Women sympathize with Jonathan, and men see me as an easy target. She took a long pause, choosing her next words carefully. I just don't understand how I could cheat on your dad if I loved him so much, Emily said, clearly struggling with the thought. He always treated you well. Kelly's gaze softened. I ask myself the same thing, she admitted. I took your dad for granted. I knew he loved me, and I became too comfortable in that love. I guess. I thought it was safe to wander, knowing I had someone solid to come home to. Jonathan was my anchor. I never thought I could lose him. Kelly met Emily's eyes with a sad smile. I hope when you find someone, you learn from me. Don't take more than you give in a relationship. Be faithful, honest, and open. If something's wrong, talk to your partner. I showed you exactly what happens when you don't. Over the following weeks, Kelly occasionally ran into Patty at the bistro. Surprisingly, she liked the young woman. Patty's confidence and good nature made it hard to dislike her, though Kelly often felt embarrassed by how eager she was to hear any mention of me. Emily rarely gave her more than surface-level updates about me. Patty, on the other hand, seemed open about our relationship, more than Kelly anticipated. She learned about my projects at the lake house, how I seemed to be throwing himself into work, and how I was adjusting to life without her. Patty spoke of me fondly, but never gave the impression that things were serious between us. Kelly wasn't sure if that made things easier or harder. I didn't expect to hear from Dan, but when he called and asked me to meet for lunch, I figured why not. We hadn't sat down together in a while, and despite everything, I still considered him one of my closest friends. I thought maybe he wanted to catch up or talk business, nothing out of the ordinary. The bistro was packed when we got there, but we found a small table near the window, tucked away from the noise. We exchanged the usual greetings, but Dan didn't waste much time getting to the point. You know that land you bought off Route 21 by the river? He asked, leaning forward a little. I nodded, already sensing where this was going. I'd picked it up for practically nothing, figuring it was a long-term play. Well, I've got a buyer lined up, he continued, willing to pay close to $2 million for it. The profit would be huge. Your share alone would be over $500,000. I could see he was excited by the idea, but I kept my face neutral, waiting to hear the rest. I take it you told them no, I said. Dan sighed, shaking his head. Yeah, I told them you weren't interested. I knew you'd want to hold on to it, probably lease it long term. But, Jonathan, that's a lot of money on the table right now. I don't understand why you'd pass it up. I leaned back in my chair, already knowing how this conversation was going to go. I'm not in a rush, Dan. We build something on that land, lease it out, and in 10 or 15 years, it'll pay for itself and then some. I'm not selling. Dan gave a half smile, the kind he always used when he thought I was being stubborn. Look, I get the long game. I really do. But you and I own 2/3 of the company. If we vote to sell, it's done. You'll still walk away with $500,000. Not a bad day, right? I could feel my shoulders tense. You're saying you want to force the sale? Dan shrugged, keeping his tone light. I'm saying we should consider it. I know you'll take it personally, but this is business. Not everything needs to be about the future, Jonathan. Sometimes it's about what's right in front of you. I stared at him for a long moment, feeling the weight of his words. You're asking me to go behind my own back, I said plainly, not bothering to hide my irritation. It's not like that, Dan said, waving a hand. It's just business. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Dan, you know damn well that's not how I see it. That land is more than just a check to me. You know how much work I've put into this company. Forcing my hand would be the same as stabbing me in the back. Dan smirked, tilting his head. Come on. Worse than Kelly sleeping with that kid at the conference? His little joke didn't sit well with me, but I kept my cool. Yeah, I said quietly. It's worse. Dan's smile faded a little, but he tried to brush it off. Jonathan, you're divorced? Why does it matter so much? This is your chance to cash in and walk away with no hard feelings. You deserve something out of all this. I shook my head, locking eyes with him. I'm not interested in screwing over the business I built, no matter what happened with Kelly. I've made enough mistakes in my personal life. I'm not about to start making them in my work, too. Dan sat back, clearly surprised by how firm I was. Fine, he said, finishing the last of his drink. But don't be surprised if I bring this up again. I didn't say anything. I just paid the check and left, my mind already miles away. Patty had told me earlier in the week that she accepted a position in Seattle and would be leaving soon. She mentioned it casually, but I could tell she knew I wasn't thrilled about it. I wasn't heartbroken, but I'd gotten used to having her around. She made the house feel less empty, even if we both knew it wasn't meant to last. You're a great guy, Jonathan, she told me, but I'm not your forever girlfriend. I need to focus on my career. I told her I understood, but it didn't stop the dull ache in my chest. When Kelly ran into Patty at the bistro, Patty must have told her the news. I hadn't said anything to Kelly directly, but I could tell she'd been fishing for information. Even now, part of me wondered if Kelly felt relieved or if it stirred something in her. I didn't know how to feel about any of it. The truth was, despite everything that happened between Kelly and me, part of me still cared. I didn't hate her. I couldn't. And as much as I tried to focus on the future, there were moments, like today, sitting across from Dan, when I realized just how much the past still lingered. It was almost a week after that awkward lunch with Dan when Kelly called me. Her voice sounded hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should even be dialing my number. Jonathan, can you meet me for coffee? She asked. It's about Dan. I agreed, more curious than anything. I hadn't spoken to Dan since that day at the bistro, and I figured maybe he had taken my refusal in stride. I should have known better. We met at the same cafe where we used to have weekend breakfasts. It felt strange being there with her again, but I brushed it off and focused on the reason for the meeting. Kelly was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived. She smiled softly, but there was tension behind it. I could tell she wasn't looking forward to whatever conversation was coming. Thanks for meeting me, she said as I sat down. What's going on with Dan? I asked, getting straight to the point. She exhaled slowly, stirring the coffee in front of her even though it didn't need it. He asked me to lunch a couple of days ago, she started. He brought up that land you bought out on Route 21. I felt my jaw tighten. I already knew where this was going. He told me about the buyer, she continued. Made it sound like an easy win for all of us. $500,000 in profit, the whole pitch. I nodded, letting her speak. But then he suggested that we team up to force the sale, she added, glancing at me carefully to gauge my reaction. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. Sounds familiar. He tried the same thing with me. Kelly's eyes flickered with something. Relief, maybe. I told him no, she said quickly. I wanted you to know that. I said I wouldn't do that to you. I studied her for a moment, the sincerity in her voice cutting through the awkwardness that usually hung between us. Thank you, I said simply. She shook her head. Jonathan, I know I haven't exactly given you many reasons to trust me, but I wouldn't betray you like that. Not again. I could tell she meant it, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like she wasn't just saying what I wanted to hear. Dan didn't take it well, she added after a pause. He told me I was being foolish, that I owed you nothing after the divorce. I chuckled dryly. Sounds like Dan. I told him he was wrong, Kelly said firmly. I might have made mistakes in our marriage, but I'm not about to drag your company down with me. I won't let him either. I appreciated the sentiment, but part of me couldn't help but wonder why Dan was so insistent. Dan's not the kind of guy to let things go, I said, rubbing the back of my neck. If he's pushing this hard, it means he's desperate for that payout. Kelly nodded, her expression serious. I thought the same thing. That's why I'm telling you. I don't know what he'll try next, but I thought you should be aware. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. I appreciate it, Kelly. Really. Her eyes softened, and for a brief moment, it felt like the wall between us had thinned. You know, she said quietly, Patty told me she overheard my conversation with Dan. She's the one who convinced me to tell you. That caught me off guard. I hadn't expected Patty to get involved, but it didn't surprise me. She had a way of looking out for people, even when it wasn't her business. She said you'd appreciate the honesty, Kelly added. She was right, I said with a small smile. For the first time in months, I felt like things were starting to settle. Kelly wasn't the same person she had been during the end of our marriage, and maybe I wasn't either. As we sat there, I realized something. Maybe the past couldn't be undone, but at least we could start rebuilding whatever was left, one honest conversation at a time. A few more weeks passed after that meeting with Kelly. I tried to focus on work, but every now and then, my mind drifted back to that conversation. It wasn't just the way she stood up to Dan that stuck with me. It was the way she carried herself, the way she seemed different. I'd spent so long holding on to the anger, convinced I needed it to move forward. But sitting across from her in that cafe, I saw something else. Regret. Not just words, but the kind of regret that settles deep into someone's bones. One Saturday afternoon, I was at the lake house, patching up some siding on the porch when I saw Kelly's car pull up. I wiped my hands on my jeans and watched as she stepped out, hesitant but determined. Hey, I said as she approached. Hey, she replied softly, offering a small smile. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, I said, setting my tools aside. What's on your mind? She glanced at the ground for a moment before meeting my eyes. I just wanted to check in and apologize. Again. I nodded, leaning against the porch railing. You already did that, Kelly. I know, she said, taking a step closer. But I realized I never actually asked you how you felt. I've been so caught up in trying to make things right that I forgot to just listen. Her words caught me off guard. For so long, it felt like the apologies had been about easing her own guilt. But this felt different. I thought about it for a moment, letting the silence hang between us. I was angry, I admitted finally. I felt betrayed, humiliated, all of it. But I guess after some time, I realized I wasn't just angry at you. I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. Kelly's eyes softened, and she nodded. I don't think either of us saw it until it was too late. Maybe, I said, but I don't want to keep holding on to that. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected to hear that. I'm not saying we can undo everything, I continued, but maybe it's time to let go of the rest of it. I don't want to keep feeling like I have to avoid you, especially with Emily in the middle of it all. Kelly's shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in a long while, she looked at ease. I'd like that, she said softly. We stood there for a moment, the lake quiet behind us. Patty was right, I added after a beat. Kelly raised an eyebrow. About what? That I'd appreciate the honesty. A small laugh escaped her lips, and for the first time in months, it felt like things weren't so heavy between us. I know I messed things up, Jonathan, she said, her voice steady but full of sincerity. But I hope one day you'll see that I never stopped caring about you. I nodded. I know. As she turned to leave, I stopped her. Hey, I called out. Why don't you stay for a cup of coffee? She hesitated, a flicker of hope crossing her face. I'd like that. We sat on the porch, the sun dipping below the trees, sipping coffee and talking about everything except the past. For the first time in a long while, it felt like we were just Jonathan and Kelly again. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what happened. Maybe it was about finding a way to move forward, together or apart, without the weight of the past holding us down. And as I watched her laugh at something I said, I realized maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Do you think I made the right decision by forgiving Kelly and letting go of the past? Or should I have kept my distance to protect myself from being hurt again? If you were in my position, would you have given her another chance to rebuild trust? Or is some damage too great to repair? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to Deceived Buddy so you never miss an update on more real-life stories. And as always, see you in the next video.